Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here so much on this Wednesday morning. Welcome to Inside Sessions. This is our April session. We're going to be talking with studio heads, managers, and our moderator is Kath Joy, our former president, who's also a composer and session, what's the word? Producer? Score producer. But composer first. And let's see. Well, I usually let the panelists introduce themselves, but Kath, if you want to introduce them, and thank you everyone for being here. And this will be on YouTube later.
Yeah, no, this is really an exciting session, and I'm super excited to be here with Candace and with Vicki. And Candace is right now the studio manager of East West Studios, and Vicki is the manager of Evergreen, and they both start with E. And there's another stage in Los Angeles called Eastwood that also starts with E. And funny story, one time I actually showed up at Evergreen when I was supposed to be at Eastwood a long time ago.
It happens.
Yeah,
It happens.
not a good situation.
At least it's
So
close.
right, it is
Did you
close.
get on? Did you get in the session?
I did. I made it there, but it was just horrifying. But I would really love to hear from both of you your origin stories. Like, you've been in this industry for a while now, even though you all look so young and fabulous. And it would be great to hear how you got started in the industry and what led you to some. I have a feeling that you didn't start out wanting to be a studio manager or planning to be a studio manager, and here you are. So how did it all happen? And Candace, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I have three older brothers, and I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. And my three older brothers were musicians and came to LA to be rock stars. And then they ended up getting jobs as janitors. They didn't even call them runners at the record plant in on 3rd Street. And they went to work for Rose, who is the grand dame of what Vicki and I do, who kind of set the tone for all the policies that we follow pretty much kind of today, really, honestly. But I would come out in high school and visit them. And I'm the only person in my family that doesn't play an instrument. My siblings, my parents, everything. I don't play anything. I play the phone. So I came out during high school, saw what they were doing, thought it was cool, was going to college, became a psych major, had a minor in business, came out in the mid 80s finally, and my brother had taken over a room at Kendon, what you guys know as Glenwood Place. And I went to work for him, learning how to be an assistant engineer in the daytime. And I was a bartender because I bartended all through college. So I bartended at night and worked for him in the studio in the daytime. And I assisted for about a year and a half. And about a year and a half, you'll love this story, Vicki. About a year and a half in, I was doing a session with a very famous engineer producer named Shel Talmy. Shel did the Kinks and a lot of other records. And I did a session with Shel, and he was really nice, but he's blind. He just passed away. But he was blind, and I was in the control room, and I kept going over. It was kind of like the Ray Charles movie where you go over and he like grabs your wrist. And I went over to the console and I kept walking up going, hey, he goes, you don't need to help me. And I'm like, we've never worked in this room before. It was a Trident 80B, Vicki, and it was a MPR 90 tape machine. Right. And I was running the tape machine. And he goes, you don't need to help me. And I go, well, you're blind. And he goes, it's okay. I got it, Candace. I got it. I'm like, okay. So after that, and he was perfectly nice. And after that session, I went to my brother and I said, I don't think I have what it takes to be an engineer. He's like, why not? You're doing great. And I'm like, well, this guy's blind and he's amazing. And he's unbelievably talented. And I said, I just don't think that I have the electronics aptitude to do this. And he was like, okay, well, you worked in hotels and you're a bartender. Can you help me book it? And I'm like, sure, yeah, I can help you book it. And because they have worked at the record plant, and anybody who's listening, and I wish there were more people listening, but anybody who's been a runner at a studio or become an assistant at a studio, the people that you work with then you're going to see, if you're lucky, for the rest of your career. And so people that have worked with my brothers, like Mike Clink and Jim Scott and people like that, when they found out that Steve had a studio, they called him, to get cheap rates and to get a bro deal. And one of the first calls I got was from Mike Clink, and it was to book Guns N' Roses for Appetite for Destruction. Very cool. That was how it started, that whole scene. And the mania that followed. I just saw Duff and Slash about a week or so ago, and they were reliving
Back to the
time.
80s.
Yeah, back to 1987.
Yeah,
That's
that's when
how
I
I got
first
started.
met you. I first
Yeah,
met you when you were at Red Zone, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That was I will stop, but I will just say one more thing, and that's my brother left me in like 1990 and went to Seattle because he's a genius to work for, Ann and Nancy Wilson, and kind of left me holding the bag. And, he was a little bit over his head with, expenses, et cetera. So I walked across the breezeway to Red Zone, which was a separate independent studio, and said, "Hey, my brother's split and I think they're going to repo our console. Can I work here?" And they fired the manager and hired me. So
Oh my
sorry,
God.
sorry about that old manager.
No, you're not.
So, and then how did you go from there to East West? Like, what was the?
Well, there have been 5 studios in my past, of which East West was cello, have been the longest run, almost 25 years of my 40-year career in this building. Shoot me now, or 20 some years. I left Red Zone because I got offered a job at Sound Castle in Silver Lake, and I went to Sound Castle for 5 years. But a producer that I met, and one thing I want to impress upon everyone, your composers as well, again, and Vicki would agree, the people that you meet on the journey up, be cool, because you're going to be seeing them for a while. And I met a producer named John Porter, a British producer who had produced the Smiths, and we became really good friends. I worked with him at Red Zone on a lot of records. He was in Roxy Music. He was good friends with Eric Clapton, blah, blah, blah. And he was doing a record with Taj Mahal in New Orleans for a billionaire who wanted to open a studio. And they said, "We're going to buy Sound City." So I called Siobhan and said, "Hey, I think you're screwed." And then they said, "No, we don't want to buy Sound City." Yeah, Siobhan was mad about that. And I said, they said, "No, we don't want to buy Sound City. We want to buy 6,000 Sunset." And all studio managers, and I think Vicki would agree with this, all of us in the early years, we were highly aware of capital and the older established studios like Ocean Way, which is what this complex was then. Ocean Way, Sunset, things like that. We were aware. We knew that these studios had been around since the 60s, and we knew of their, just their history and their credit, their credibility, whatever pedigree. So I said, "Yeah." He said, "We want you to be the manager it's going to be called Cello." And that was in 1998. I left Soundcastle, and my resignation letter was on my computer, Vicki. And Buddy and Pat, I hadn't given it to him yet, and I'd written this resignation letter. There's so many stories, Catherine, that I'll tell you about where I got offered a job by Gary Bells and I was making 30 grand. And I went back to Soundcastle and they said, "Okay, we'll give you 45 grand." And I was like, "Okay, awesome." And that was a lot of money. And so I had my resignation letter there and they'd just given me this raise. And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to split," because I was going to make 60 grand. I was like, "Holy shit." It's like 1980, 19, yeah, it was early, So I'm like, "Oh
Yeah.
crap." So I had my resignation letter on my computer and I come to work the next day and Pat goes, "Is there something you want to tell me?" It's the Pat King and Buddy King were the owners of Soundcastle. It's called Pulse now, still open, run by Josh Abrams and Scott Cutler and in Silver Lake. And I was like, "Oh shit." And so I told her and yeah, that was that. And then I
And
came
then
to
you
check.
got me an interview. Do you remember that?
Yes, yes.
I
They
thought
should have hired
I
you.
thought he was so creepy because we met at a bar and it
Oh
was,
yeah.
that
Oh
was
yeah.
late 80s, early 90s. I
Did
was
he
like,
ask
this
you
is
for a
so
blowjob?
weird.
Yeah.
No, but his wife was such a, you know what, to me?
Yeah. Oh
Like,
wow.
I mean, she was a
Probably
hard ass.
does.
She
She's actually a
scared me.
wonderful woman. We're talking about what would have been considered harassment at the time that I think because I have 3 brothers, just laughed it off.
Right, right.
I don't think that's okay. And I don't think people should ever feel intimidated or scared, but I never did
Yeah.
because he was pretty harmless. But yeah, I always have a saying, again, not politically correct, but if you don't know how to deflect a man's advances by the time you're 18 with grace, you're an ugly girl. If you don't know how to, gently just sort of
Going,
without making them feel like crap, you
right,
know,
right.
so that's but anyway, they were actually really good to me. And then I came here and then Cello closed in '05 and I went to Firehouse and then I got Doug Rogers from East West Sounds to buy the studio in '06 and I came back in 2010 and I love it and
You
I've
were,
been
you were part of that negotiation?
oh yeah. Yeah, I didn't make any money on it, but yeah, I was. It was in bankruptcy. the former billionaire was getting sued, and we were sort of a flea on the overall, in the big picture for him, but he was annoyed. So he bankrupted us, which ended up being a blessing, to be quite honest, because they sealed everything within the studio and left it as is. And then Dub was able to buy it out of bankruptcy for a very good price. So
Wow. Incredible.
yeah, it's craziness.
Um, yeah, no,
Vicki
I love the
stories, right,
chaotic
Vicki?
nature of recording studios. I think it's
It's a very unbusiness-like business, to be honest.
Yes.
And most of it's a handshake, now an email, but it was, booking was, just with a pencil and a paper,
Right. I'm gonna say really analog. Your big book on your desk. Studio.
giant book, dry erase board behind my
Yep.
desk,
Yep.
you know.
Man, things have
Catherine,
changed.
wild.
Vicki, your building, where you are at Evergreen, but all the enterprise rooms, I never have gone over. Every time I go to Evergreen, I never make it across the street. How much has it changed at Enterprise?
Um,
The
it's
physical space.
it's almost the same. It's just better. And we've got most of the rooms leased out by the month. There's only one room over there that I can book.
Dude, good for
And
you.
yeah. And it's
The biggest room?
it's Freddie Wexler's studio. Well, it's our studio. He calls it his studio, but it's ours. We paid for it. But you've been over there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
What do
okay.
you have in the room that you can book?
I'm sorry, airplane.
Is there an analog console
We
in the
can't
room?
hear it. It's okay.
It's the SSL, just like the one that's in Studio A, the Fuse,
Nice.
the Duality.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're having some headaches because we wanted Paul Cox to wire it, and then he was too expensive. So this Freddie guy brought in his own guy, and it's just not right. So
Yeah.
I
My tech is freelance. His name's Alfredo Arresto. I kind of stole him not stolen, but Tina referred him from the village.
yeah, I remember
Another
you
thing,
telling me.
another thing we want to say as studio managers is your relationship with your chief engineer tech is crucial.
Yeah, for
They
sure.
are the reason that we roll, you know, and
Yeah.
if you want to keep them happy. I don't have a full-time tech. I only have 3 days a week now.
Oh man.
Well, you guys froze, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've
But
got one, but it can be
you're all frozen.
problematic.
so Vicki, what's your story? How did you get into where you
Um,
are?
I, like Candace, don't play an instrument. Always thought I would be able to, but I didn't because I dated only musicians from fresh out of high school. I married a singer, and but I always was like a more behind the scenes kind of person. I would go to like these tapings of these. There was a show called Midnight Special. You're all too young to remember that, except for Candace. But my dad used to drop me off when I was like 15, and I'd stand in the audience, and I saw so many bands taping this show, and I was more concerned about the mixer and the cameraman than I was about anything else. So I was always looking behind me. Anyway, long story short, I was living with a drummer, and I would go to almost all of his sessions, and I was learning how to be an assistant, rolling up cables and putting up mics and stuff like that. And I was working for a company that spray painted sports equipment. And he said to me, "Why don't you try to get a job doing something hipper?" And I lived literally walking distance from A&M. So one day I just went over there and I gave him my resume and filled out an application, and they called me and said, "We'll hire you, but it's in the accounting department." I was like, better than nothing. It's a way in. So I worked there for 2.5 years, and I moved to Chrysalis Records, and I was there for 2 years. And then I was doing music publicity for 5 years. So I traveled with Men at Work and In Excess and Men Without Hats. And I just went all over the world with them, which was really fun. We did the first US festival. And, like we'd go to New York for the MTV Music Awards and stuff like that. It was the greatest job ever. But record companies stopped paying for independent publicity people. So that job went away. And so I went to the studio where my brother-in-law was the maintenance guy. And he said, they're looking for somebody. And I had gone there with my sister. My sister and him got married. She was very young. And he would work nights at Hollywood Sound working on the consoles. So my sister and I would go late at night and meet him there, and he would play us like Prince did his first record there. So he played us the vocals with nothing else, and we could hear him grunting and groaning, and we were laughing. We'd go upstairs and scream in the echo chambers and just shit like that. And then fast forward 10 years later, I'm the studio manager there. So I was there for 11 years. And then one morning, the owner came in and he said, you know, I think I'm going to make my son vice president. His son was 17, a drug addict, a total alcoholic, like letting people in at night that weren't supposed to be there, getting drunk with the clients, buying booze for underage members of like the little rap bands. Was right when the rap was coming out. Anyway, I said, so I've spent 11 years here and I get nothing. And he's like, well, you know, he's my son, blah, blah, blah. And I walked right after that. And now the building is sold. He's probably made a shit ton of money because he held on to it for all this time. But so then I thought I was like screwed. And I started working for AWFC, which was probably the country's biggest audio gear rental company. So we shipped gear all over the world for touring bands, for studios, for whatever. Did that for 7 years. Went to another rental company doing the same thing, but on the scoring stages instead. I was there for 7 years too. And then I got called about working at the bridge. And so I met with Greg and he said, when can you start? And I started like 2 weeks later. And I was there for 9 years. And then he decided to sell the studio, which was very sad for the community. And I got a call from the Fab Factory. And Sean said, I want to hire you. We went to lunch several times, blah, blah, blah. But I knew that Evergreen's gig was going to be up. And I was just waiting and waiting and waiting. Paula called, you know, everybody on my behalf said, hire Vicki, hire Vicki. And meanwhile, the Fab Factory guy's bugging me every day. He's calling me. What do you want? Tell me what you want. So I said, 200,000. Got it. And I didn't want the job though, you know, because it's an Atmos room again. And I just didn't want to be stuck in that kind of post, you know. Anyway, finally, Evergreen called. I did the interview. I met with Harvey. He said, when can you start? And I called Sean and I'm like, dude, I'm really sorry. This is what I want to do. I need to be around musicians. I need to be around people because when somebody's just mixing in the back room, you don't see anybody. You're stuck there looking out the window, waiting for the session to end. There's no action. I love the action. So Sean's like, well, I'll give you whatever you want. And I said, stop it. You're killing me. I'm going to take the Evergreen gig. So I did. And here I am 3 years later.
Dude, I've never made that much money in my life.
I know. Mark's like, why didn't you take it? I didn't like it.
But you need as you said, you just need to be in the right environment doing the thing you love. Like life is too short.
Exactly.
Both of the studios that you're at have such an incredible history, and I would just love if you could, like, incredible and weird history for both studios. Vicki, can you just talk about the history of Evergreen and then Candace? So I'd love to hear from you about East West.
Yeah, it was a movie theater, the Magnolia Theater in 1949. And if you see the front of the building, it's pretty obvious it was a theater. Actually, when I was about 5 or 6, I saw The Sound of Music here because I grew up around here. And so somewhere in the 70s, I guess, Gail Levant and her husband at the time and another partner were talking about how they needed stuff that was on film to be played back in an environment where they could have sound and picture at the same time. And they went to all these facilities and they couldn't find one. And so they brought it to the theater and they said, you know, this works perfectly. And if I need this, other people are going to need this too. So they bought the building and turned it into a studio and ran it for, I don't know how many years it was still Evergreen. And then it was purchased by some brothers who I believe are Brazilian cartel. And they called it the Sound Gallery. And
no, they're not Brazilian. They're from Fresno. I work for them.
Oh,
okay.
really?
One is dead and one's in prison, right? That's what I
No,
heard.
they're fine. Matt Salazar and Jason Salazar. They're fine.
Okay.
They're
all
not in
right.
prison. They're
I
alive.
heard stories. I
They're
came to
fine.
the opening.
I'll tell you about
But
them later. They're fine.
okay. But the weird thing is when I worked for Audio Effects and the Enterprise, which across the street are were the same company, Craig Huxley's companies. And when Craig bought it from Gail Levant and it started Evergreen, Enterprise 2 is what he called it. And I came over here and they were gutting the place and putting in new wiring and stuff like that. And I said, man, I want to work here. But Tom Brown and I were fighting over it because he's like, I'm going to book it. I'm going to book it. Anyway, so it's kind of this weird full circle thing that I've wound up here in a place that I worked across the street at. But anyway, so it's changed hands, I don't know how many times. And finally, right when the pandemic started, a company called the Post Group bought this building and all the buildings across the street. They have several companies everywhere, all over the country. And they brought Lawrence in from Air in London to be our chief engineer. And the good and bad about the COVID, the good thing was that's the opportunity he had to rewire the entire place, put the new console in. I mean, literally every panel, every wire. He bought all Bruce Botnick's mics, which was a fortune, and all new gear, and was able to start staffing it. And if it weren't for the pandemic, I don't know if he would have gotten it done that quickly, you know.
Yeah.
So, and here we are. It's where we are now.
And the transformation really I remember because I did a session before, before it was rewired and everything happened to it. And it was such a different vibe.
Yeah. Was that James Alter?
Yeah.
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 They wanted me to consult, but I sat in on a session that went so south and they had to redo it for free. And it was not pretty. So I said, I'm not going to refer people to you unless you get your shit together. I'm not going to put my name on your building if nothing worked.
Yeah, exactly. And it really had that vibe of like there were wires hanging out of the walls, and it just felt and the energy in the space, which I think is so important. And I think a huge part of that is you both, because how a studio is run is all about the people who are running it, and it's not just about the walls and about the gear. It's about the humans, I think, is what I'm trying to communicate. But yeah, so I did a session there before COVID, and it was such different energy. And I didn't, it wasn't like I didn't like being there, basically. And then coming back to it post COVID and seeing all the changes and just feeling this life that was there was incredible. And it's amazing because with both of your studios, they've been around for such a long time. So there's so much history when you're in those rooms to record. It's just like incredible what's been recorded there.
Yeah.
It's just a phenomenal experience. So, Evergreen was a movie theater, and then East West, a grocery store.
Yeah, East
right?
West was a grocery store at the turn of the century, but and then it was a casino in the 40s, aka pseudo brothel. And then it was part of the Columbia lot for a minute, but it was called the Radio Center Building for a while. And it was the Studio One was actually a radio, like for radio shows, like where audiences would sit and listen, watch radio shows being recorded. I don't even know how that works, but anyway, so pre screen. But yeah, I mean, it's been a studio since 1961, I think. Vicki, it's funny, your place. My husband grew up on Clybourne and used to go to the Magnolia Theater all the time when he was a kid, because we're a little bit tiny bit older than you, but yeah, trippy, yeah. But so it's been a studio since, I said, like 61, and Bill Putnam, who most people in the recording industry are highly aware of, was an early pioneer with Les Paul, and Tom Dowd. He both an engineer and a designer. And his sons, of course, are Bill Putnam Jr. and his brother, and they are Universal Audio. So they took all the analog, schematics of their dad's gear and made digital plugins, and we love them. But yeah, it's been a studio since 1960, 1961. And it's funny because people, Connor, you'll crack up. People will be like, were you here then? I'm like, I was 3, no, I was 2, no. No,
Look,
I wasn't the manager in 1960. I'd be
you
110.
are so mean, Lucky.
Dude, it's so silly. But yeah, I mean, both Vicky's studio and this studio, I mean, I think when I started, remember the studio menu, Vicky?
Yeah. Oh my God.
There was a physical menu, Catherine and Connor. It was called the studio menu, and it was put out by a guy named Gene Shively, who had a mastering studio in Pasadena called CMS. And it was a physical laminated menu. It was one thing that opened, and there were over 800 studios in LA
Something like
at
that.
at that time. And then, up and down, and you could get listed in this menu regardless of it didn't matter how big or how
Yep.
small.
Yep.
But it was very useful. And I think early on, and I think Vicki and I both, I know I'm digressing from the history of my
Oh, it's
building.
fine.
I think early on, I was always a fan of and wanted to be friends with the other managers. I wanted to commiserate. I was never a hater. I don't think. I don't
No,
think.
never.
I always wanted to be like, okay, how are you doing? And how are you doing this? And just wanted to like, we didn't call it best practices, but essentially that's what it was. Just making sure that we were kind of all on the same page. And, you know, um, during the history of both of our studios, the home studio revolution was occurring, and there was an organization called HARP, and it was the Hollywood Association of Recording Professionals. And we all went to a meeting, and we were all like, down with home studios because they're not zoned. And it was kind of like opening a daycare center in your house. It's still not legal to run a business out of your house, but that's another story for another time. But anyway, I think we were concerned, and we managed these historic facilities, and in an environment where people were changing the way records were made. I think we were all a little like worried about like, uh-oh, what's going to happen? But happily for Vicki and I both, you can't do a 60-piece score in your house, you
Yay.
know? So, we've been fortunate there. And like you said, the building's just a building without the people in it. So your staff is so important, from the runners, the chief engineer, anybody who ever watches this or listens to this and wants to open their own studio, just remember you got to have a good tech.
And don't do it because you won't make any money.
Yeah,
But
don't
whatever.
do it. Yeah, don't do it. But yeah, I mean, I think we've both been really lucky and been able to make a living, and I'm getting very close to retirement. I know Vicky wants to too. People are like, "Oh, do you want to retire?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I mean, there's other things I want to do. I have a podcast, not to plug my podcast, but I have a podcast, and
Jeez.
there's other things. Yeah, it's called Trade Secrets. Check it out, Vicky. I need to get you on.
Yes.
Catherine,
Oh
get
my
you on.
gosh. I'm gonna
Um,
check it out 100%.
Yeah, it's on YouTube and Google and stuff like that. But there's so many things I want to do. And one of them is not be under the pressure of running other people's businesses and booking time.
Like,
Yeah.
As much as I love my clients, you know, but it's a lot of pressure, and Catherine, for you as an independent composer and independent composers, I mean, man, it must be, you're so talented, and it must be tough, getting those gigs and getting recognized and stuff like that.
I mean, it's really tough. And I think for me, being, in your studios is the reward, honestly. And people often ask me about my home studio, like, what's your home studio like? And I'm like, it's as simple as I can have it, because I don't want to spend money on this. I want to save money so that I can come and be in these spaces,
God bless
where, well, because it's, like one of my feature scores I did at East West in Studio 3, which is a pet sound studio, and being in that space, I mean, and maybe it's, all in our
There's a
head,
vibe. Vicky's got a vibe.
but
There's
you
definitely a
feel the
vibe.
vibe. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
absolutely.
mojo.
And it's totally a mojo, and the power of being in a studio and having people come in. And I think it's also like, that's a big part of it. We were just in Evergreen, recording a score for Sony, and all day, we had people from the film coming through, and then just other musicians, who were friends with the composer, and they were all just like coming and hanging out, and
It's
um
collaborative,
it's
and I
it's
think
collaborative, but I feel like when you're in these spaces, it's really communicating the power and the awesomeness and the significance of bringing all these musicians together to create a score, and I feel like, my soapbox is always like, as composers, we need to teach and communicate, like the work that goes into creating the score, and then but also how special it is. And I've every time I've been in your studios and brought people in, they're just overwhelmed by how cool it is. And then they want to, find a way to invest money into making that happen again and again. And yeah, I think, we worked on the show, HBO's Edge, I think it's called Edge of the Earth, something like that. And we actually did one session at East West and one session at Evergreen. And
right.
the HBO exec was just he was just riveted by the whole experience. And one thing he said was like, I've never seen a film set be run this efficiently, because when you're in the studio, you have to, you know you ha you don't have to be, but it's, especially with scoring, time is money. And I feel like every time I'm in the studio, I just have this counter in my head of like all the money you're hemorrhaging every second that goes by. But he was so blown away by the whole experience. And then we had the filmmakers who were, like, this was about, extreme sports. So the filmmakers came in with their, like, they're just in their sports gear, like they just walked off from surfing or snowboarding or whatever, and they came into the studio and they were just overwhelmed by how awesome it is. And I think it's so important to still have those spaces. Like for me, they're, like the best kind of church, honestly, church for music. So
We're
yeah.
highly aware, Vicki and I both are highly aware of what it takes and the money that it takes for you guys to come in and record. And we are painfully aware of getting you started on time and making sure that everything's cool. I mean, we're basically like hotel concierges. I always say that we're like hotels with technology. I think Vicki is an ultimate hostess when you're in her house, and you feel that personal attention to detail, the same as you as a composer is putting the attention to detail, working out who you're hiring through the contractor, who's playing on what part, etc. It takes a village, and I'm so happy that there's, more female composers and more women in general in our whole sphere and our whole scope. But I do want anyone who's watching to know that traditionally the studio managers have always been women, back since back to
Can
the
we
like
talk about
40s.
that for a second?
Yeah,
Because you were talking about, you said Rose was
yeah.
who the playbook.
Our
Can we
mother.
hear a bit about her? Because
Oh, she's amazing. Well,
who
before
was
Rose,
she?
also
And
Dee Willoughby, there were others. I mean, I think the transition happened, and Vicki chime in. I think it happened where women were thought of as secretaries. So when these businesses started to launch and consoles started to be made from broadcast equipment to recording equipment, because everybody was flying by the seat of their pants and recording. There were no recording consoles until Les Paul invented one, which Vicki has seen. And then it started to become, usually they recorded in a live hall or like a concert hall. So when studios came into being, people like Bill Putnam and Tom Dowd and Les Paul, they had secretaries, and these secretaries dealt with the scheduling, and it was called traffic, which was the scheduling of the sessions. And studios like mine, they were 24/7, with like 3 8-hour sessions, And then when rock and roll kind of came along, and in the late, in the 60s and the 70s, Rose was in place at the record plant on Third in the early 70s. She also worked at Kendon. And, and it was a heady time. No one could have their home studio because we have large format consoles and big tape machines and all these things that people wouldn't really have in their house. Anyway, so when I say she set the tone, I think it was the Beatles that created the 12-hour lockout. Jeff Emmerich told me that
really,
when he was still alive. And we were all kind of like, bummer.
Damn you, Beetle.
Yeah.
Can
But
you break down what you mean by a 12-hour lockout?
well, our day, quote unquote, a lockout, it can be a single day, which is 12 hours from the downbeat to the end of the session, not including the setup. And, Rose kind of set the tone about how setup time and, we all created our own criteria. Can you guys still hear me? My internet's
Yeah.
wonky.
Yeah.
But basically, how long it should take to set up a tracking date, a rhythm section, how long it should take to set up, a scoring date and things like that. And we worked obviously with the engineers to come up with these ideas and these plans, but once we got it kind of a standardization, as it were, not that it's really standard, but sort of a roadmap for how we would do our job, which was we book the time, take the deposit, whether it was from an independent artist or a PO from a label, which is a purchase order, which is how you get paid. But Rose really, at the record plant in the time of, this is Ron Nevison was the chief engineer. This is a time of very, very busy rock and roll in the late 60s and early 70s and on through our time, where it was just, okay, this is how you handle clients. This is how you handle client service. Whether client service was, okay, I hate to burst your bubbles, strippers and blow, whatever it was that was required, we were are the gatekeepers and the concierges of these facilities and set the tone of what was and wasn't allowed. And there was a lot allowed.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. There was a lot allowed. There wasn't much that wasn't allowed.
I think she was the first one to put her foot down about how many people in the posse can come to
Right.
this.
Yeah. How many people could be in the control room that were not an essential part of the production?
Right. Right.
Which,
Smoking
you know,
weed.
yeah, she was married to an engineer. She married Ed Cherney, who was beloved and has passed away, but was a very well-known engineer. But Rose ruled with an iron hand. I saw it firsthand, her dealing with and again, not to offend any males present, but it's like big boy daycare, she ruled with an iron fist over these guys that were getting into all kinds of shenanigans. They're young guys. They're working with famous, female rock stars and stuff. So yeah, it was kind of just how to do it with class, how to do it without offending, how to sort of wrangle people without making them feel wrangled, I guess. What would you say, Vicki?
Exactly. It's perfectly said. Yeah. She's our
You know,
queen.
yeah, she is the grand dame for sure. I'm hoping we might have a documentary in the works. We'll see what happens with that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it
I
would
would
be
love to see
amazing.
that.
It
You
would
both
be
met
amazing.
her, you both knew her personally?
Oh yeah.
And is she still with us?
She's very much still with us. She's retired, but she has a beautiful home in Venice, California. And since her husband passed, she spends a lot of her time traveling. She's 78 now, and she is just gorgeous. I mean, oh my, she's so beautiful. She's half Italian, half Filipino, and she's
Oh,
just a
wow.
class act all the way with a great sense of humor.
Yeah. And a great
But yeah,
cook.
she helped us. She helped us. You could call her, huh, Vicki? You could call her
Yeah.
and you could say, like, I don't know what to do. This rap artist is super famous, but he's got 30 people and there's bringing in all these chicks and you just kind of, and Vicky knows when I ran Soundcastle, it was a gangster rap studio in the early years of gangster rap in the 90s. And I ended up loving all of my clients and it ended up being a great experience, but it was scary. I was a 30-year-old white woman from South Carolina and people were showing up with machine guns.
Yeah.
It was a whole like, how do I get these very scary people to be cool?
Right.
And she gave me a lot of help. I would go in and give my little speech with all with the rappers. I'd
Wait,
be
what
like,
is the
hey,
speech?
well, you're in my house now. And just like your mom, I don't tolerate disrespect to my staff or my equipment. We'll get along fine if you treat me and my people great. You have to put your guns in this laundry basket in my hand, which I'll keep under my desk, which you can come get later. Or you have to put your guns in your trunk. And if any of you get out of line, that's it. You're out, you know. And it worked, man. I'm telling you, they all were scared of their moms.
Ah, totally.
Yeah. That's what Duff said to me the other day when he was talking about Guns N' Roses. He said, "You were one of us, but we were terrified of you." And I was like, Really? Of me?" And he was like, "Yeah, yeah." And I said, "I was just trying to get you guys from not getting kicked out because I was working for my brother."
Exactly. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Vicky, do you have a speech that you've had to give over the years?
Yeah. Yeah, Vicki, what's your speech?
Same thing. I didn't see a lot of guns. I saw some guns, but I always made them take them outside. I don't want those in my house.
Well,
Same
you're a
thing.
mom. See, you were actually a mom. So you had the
Yeah,
mom skill. I wasn't a mom.
totally.
I was never
Yeah.
a mom.
Yeah, you are a mom.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, exact. Yeah,
Yeah, I
totally.
got some
I'm not a
practice in
mom,
my
but
own.
I feel like a mom for
Well, I
that.
mean, first time I had to give a speech was this little rapper. I forget the name of what band it was, but he's 17 years old. He comes straight to my office. He throws his keys down on my desk and he said, "Park my car."
Ooh.
I said, "Excuse me."
Wow.
Yeah. So that's where it started, where I put my foot down. It's like, you don't ever talk to me that way.
Yeah, I'm not
Ever.
your valet.
Exactly what I said. I said, "Park your own car. I'll feed your meter." That's
In
that's
my
as
in
far as
my
I
parking lot, you don't want to park your own car, Connor. I have a very scary parking lot, don't I, Catherine?
Yes.
Very scary,
Terrifying.
tight parking lot. Vicky, I have parking envy. Vicky has 100+ spaces. I have
I
six.
know.
best thing. I when I worked at the bridge, they yelled at me. The musicians yelled at me every day, especially if it was street cleaning day, because
Oh yeah,
only half the street was available. Oh
yeah.
my God. It was a nightmare. Especially the
And we would
Simpsons.
like to set up a shuttle to your lot from East to West.
You can do that. Can't
Parking
be
is
Yeah,
too
I
quick
know.
though.
That's
parking's a
such a great idea.
nightmare.
I love that idea. Setting up a shuttle too.
Yeah.
So funny. For, people, so this is being recorded, and so definitely a lot of AWFC members are going to watch this, and many of them probably haven't had the budget to record, or maybe they think they don't have the budget to record in your studios. And I would just love to know, like, I would just love to have you speak to that. And then also, like, when you're booking a session, like, what should you know? What should you be prepared? What questions are you going to ask that they should know the answers to? And Vicky, do you want to start? And then we'll pass back to Candace.
Um, it shouldn't be that daunting trying to book time. We're very nice, and I am always willing to help out anyone that needs the help. A lot of my sessions, it's a case by case basis. Like with your stuff, it's like, oh, we have a budget on this one. We don't have a budget on that one. Just call me. Let me know what you need. I can come down. I can never go up, but I can always come down, you know.
Yeah. I think that's it. That's the critical thing is just to call you guys, like at Evergreen. Well, you do have a few spaces. You have the big room, but you have a few spaces, and then certainly East West, there's different sizes of rooms, which come with different budgets, right? So everyone should just call you and talk to you about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, don't be afraid. We will do the very best we can. If we have time available, because Vicky and I both, our mindset is, when a day is gone, it's gone forever, and you can't rebook
Yeah.
it because time is the most perishable thing that there is. So if we have an open day or open time and we can make a deal, we will. I mean, I have certain parameters I can't go below because I'll get yelled at. But that said, cash talks. Can you close that door, Keith? Cash talks. Cash can help. Quick payment is a certain consideration which can help get a better deal. And at the same time, I'll say to those of you out there, we give favors hoping that the favor will be returned in kind. When your budgets are increased and when you become more, popular and more famous and can actually spend more money, we do hope that you'll bring that back to us. And in my experience, it's been good,
Yeah.
honestly. But what the questions that we will ask you, what is it you're looking to record? What is the instrumentation? How much time do you need? Do you have a recording engineer of your own that you're bringing with you to the session? All of my rates include an assistant only. I think Vicky's probably the same. We the assistant engineers are really just the best. I mean, they're so crucial. They know our rooms. They work with all kinds of independent engineers because often an engineer is coming into the studios for the first time. So if you are a young composer and you have an engineer you've been working with, I would say make sure they know what they're doing.
Good advice.
Not to be, yeah,
Seriously though.
not to be
Seriously.
unkind,
No.
but if there's someone that's been sitting in a closet, and not that there's anything wrong with sitting in your own studio working on Pro Tools, but if you don't understand mic placement and you don't understand how to utilize rooms like ours, the assistant engineer will help you and our staff will help you. But what is important to us, I think what matters to us for you to get the best experience is to understand, read about us, look on our websites, find out what we've done, find out what the rooms, the different sizes and the kinds of things that we've done, and understand this, as much as you can, the space that you're going into. One of the things, and Vicky's going to back me up on this, one of the things that we find amusing is when someone comes into one of our rooms and they don't use the room the way the room's intended to be used. The room is an instrument in and of itself, regardless of its size. And the acoustics of that space are there to enhance what you're recording. And microphones are important, of course. And, when we see people come in and it's a 12-piece state and they put 24, 30 mics on it, we know that they don't really understand what they're doing, because in spaces like these, you want to let the room sound be heard. You want that cello or you want that horn or you want that instrument to have the air that it needs to be properly recorded and to be heard, So if you're close miking everything and you're baffling everything off and you're like during COVID, we were both in hell because of the way they made us record, with like the way they positioned people, like in front of each other, and we were like, what are you doing? This is crazy. But right. And we were just, so that's something that we won't comment because we're not your engineer, but we may notice if your engineer doesn't have a grasp. But our assistants and everyone on our staff is here to help them utilize the potential of our rooms.
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Vicki, there you go.
No, I mean, 100%. Exactly what you said. We know a rookie when we see one.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we're still nice. We'll still help. We'll make suggestions, whatever. Sometimes they'll ask for suggestions.
That's who we love. We love the people that know they don't know.
Exactly.
At
Well,
every level.
and that's another thing, right? It's just ask questions and
Be honest.
utilize team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm lost here. Help me.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll help you.
Yeah. And I love, Candace, what you say about the instrument being a room. That's
the room being an
instrument.
But that too. But Vicki will back me up too. Like, it's many a cold call that we take from people who don't understand the process, whether they're a composer or a young band or even a young A&R person who doesn't really know, like, how do I do this? Well, you just call us, and if you tell us what you're recording, we can direct you to the right room. And we can probably, if you don't have an engineer, we can definitely find you someone who understands your genre, or will maybe have credits that are appropriate for the style of music that you're doing. We help all the time. That's all we do, so, and we're happy to do it. So
yeah,
it's better for us if you have a good experience, because then you're going to come back. So
exactly.
It's a win-win. We've been training our own clients for 40 years. Like all the people that came up under us,
right?
Like Evergreen alum or East West alum that rebook. It's a winning thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you have before I wrap up, do you have a story? What's one of your stories that you share over drinks about studio manager life?
There's like
There's thousands.
Pick one tall tale. I can see you both going through like your Rolodex.
Going through it.
Well, on Robin Sanders' 29th birthday, I had a cake made in the shape of breasts, and I gave that to him, and there was a stripper that came into the control room, and they were going to pour water into the console, and I picked her up and threw her over my back. She was about your size, Vicki. Walked her into the courtyard so they couldn't pour water on the console. everything's fine. The session goes as planned. Robin's happy. And that was in 1987. Cheap Trick came in 6 years ago, and Robin still remembered his birthday. Then when his daughter went to Emerson in audio, Emerson College, he called me up and said, "Will you hire my daughter as an intern?" And I did. And I said yes. And so,
Amazing.
yeah,
I love that.
That's
full
amazing.
circle.
Okay,
Stripper birthday cake, you know.
I think
There
it
you
was back in either probably early 90s. At Hollywood Sound, it was just a door that opened onto Selma Avenue. And I wasn't comfortable with that. So I got one of those heavy duty screen doors. And we would have homeless people come in. The reason I got the door is homeless people would come in literally and steal my coffee pots and just walk out the door like they belong there. So I got the gates, and there's guy just kept ringing the bell and ringing the bell and ringing the bell. And I went to the door and I said, "What?" He goes, "Let me in." It just fucked up. And I said, "Who are you? And who are you here to see?" And he said, "I'm here to see Rick Rubin." And I said, "Okay, well, that was right." And I said, "Well, what's your name?" And he goes, "I'm Ginger fucking Baker." I thought he was a homeless dude.
If
I
you're
let him
too
in.
young, they might be
I
too
let him
young to know who Ginger Baker is.
He
Okay,
might, I don't know. Look him up. He just died.
Ginger Baker was the drummer for the Cream for Eric Clapton.
That's so funny. I mean, my favorite game to play in Los Angeles is it a homeless person or is it a rock star?
Exactly. That was
And
it.
I literally I was at Beverly Hills Hotel and in the lobby, and then I saw someone walking in the door, and I thought it was a homeless person, and you know, or and
It
then
was
I
Keith
looked
Richards.
closer. It was Ozzy. You know, it was Ozzy. And
That's
Sharon showed
hilarious.
up 5 minutes later. It was so crazy though, but he looked rough, and hilarious. So
Yeah,
incredible. I'm here to
That's
see Rick Rubin. Magic words.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
that's
yeah.
incredible. Thank you both so much for being here, and I'm I'm so glad we have this recorded. And and I'm also just so grateful. I'm grateful to both of you because you make my life easy on a weekly basis. And coming to the studio and knowing you're both going to be there, and of course Keith as well. We want to give a shout out to
He left the
Keith.
room. But yeah,
Yeah, we love him too.
yeah.
Um, you know, it's really it's really comforting coming to your studios on a super stressful day where the stakes are super high, and knowing you're there and that we can talk through things if things come up, and then also just dealing with the stress of booking and schedules and all that kind of thing, and money, as you mentioned, all the stressful things. So I'm really grateful, and I'm really grateful and always in an admiration of the women running the studios in LA. And I just think it's an awesome example that you're setting for all the humans.
Well,
Um,
thank you for encouraging all your humans to book commercial studios.
There you go.
yes, I will be on that soapbox till I die. Um, thank you both so much. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Connor.
We're about
And
composers who aren't AI. That's what we
yeah,
want human beings to create music.
Yeah.
exactly. 100% and forever. All right. Thanks so much. Thank you, Connor.
Thank you
Thanks for
so
having
much.
us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Love you, Candace.
All right.
everyone.